what I'm going to do here, what I'm going to attempt, is to talk about Southwest management of fires from a pretty focused Forest Service kind of perspective, and that just comes from my experience. But what I'm hoping from this is that you can all walk away with an idea of what I mean when I say that every fire on our landscapes is an opportunity. So that's what I'd like for all of you to walk away from this little talk here. So I'm going to start with this slide, and I think most of us here have probably seen these type of graphs, this type of information. Basically, this is a composite burn scar analysis. This is for Weber Creek, so it's about a 2,000-acre area up by Payson, Arizona. It's tucked in the Mogollon Rim area, so it's got ponderosa pine, it's got dry mixed conifer components, and even a little bit of a wet mixed conifer type in there. And what we see in this, and we see this across all the Southwest, we see this across the West in general, is we see this cessation of fire post-widespread settlement in the West. So in this case, it's post about 1880. So you can see we lose those events of fire as we go forward in time here. And we know this. We know this across our systems. We've studied this for years. We have a lot of studies that show this kind of cessation of fire. So from a management perspective, what does this mean for us? What does a reference fire regime look like? And what does it mean for management of fire? So this slide is an attempt to show the Southwest. So we have Arizona, New Mexico, and these are all Forest Service lands. The areas in orange are those areas, all those ecosystems that have what we would call a frequent fire regime. The areas in gray would be those areas that we would call a less frequent fire regime. And what we did there is we lumped them, so any fire regime that was less than 35 years considered frequent, and all those above 35 years between fires would be infrequent. So you can see for the Forest Service, overall, we're managing a lot of land that has frequent fire regimes. So when we put some numbers to this, and what we did here is we have these groups of ecosystem types with those that are frequent in orange and those that are unfrequent or not as frequent in gray, with the number of acres that exist across the Southwest, and then an average fire return interval. And then we added some years to that fire interval because we're managers and we try to keep things a little bit realistic. So if it was 10 years on average across the Southwest, we've said maybe we can manage it for 20 years. So that's what we did here. So that's that average fire regime interval column here. So that would indicate that in the Southwest, we would need to keep up with fire regimes to be burning 945,000 acres on Forest Service lands. So that's a lot of acres. And we're going to talk a little bit here in just a second about how much we actually burn. And that'll give you maybe a little bit of a perspective of our challenge here. The one thing I want to mention with this slide is that I included the ecosystems that are more longer regimes. And the reason why is we tend to ignore those sometimes. We tend to really focus on those frequent fire regimes. But really, those areas that maybe only burn every 200 years, every maybe 70 years, or a little bit more than that, also need to be burning regularly. It's not because it's 200 years that it's not going to happen in our lifetime, right? So we need to be focused on those as well, and not let those be huge patches at once. And I'll talk more about patch size here in a second too. So let's just for fun, look at Arizona and New Mexico all lands. Let's act like we didn't just listen to Brian talk about the challenges with land ownership, and act like these are all ecosystems that we can manage. So this is what that same picture looks like. Again, the orange is going to be your frequent fire, your gray is going to be your infrequent fire. So again, the Sonoran Desert pops out, right? A lot of gray there in southwestern Arizona. And then we have a lot of orange in eastern New Mexico. And that's going to be all your grassland types in that area. Okay, so again, a lot of frequent fire regimes there. If we put acres to that, so the same table as we saw earlier, but now we're looking at the numbers for both states, we're talking about almost 5 million acres that should be burning to keep up with historical fire regimes. It's a lot of acreage, a lot of acreage. So how much are we treating? So I'm going to focus on the Forest Service because those are the numbers I have. This is what we get. So what we have here is the bars in red are the total combined of our mechanical work, our prescribed fire work, and our use of wildfire. What we see here is that even in our best year, in 2009, we got to 400,000 acres. So we're not even halfway to our 945,000 acres that we should be treating somehow, hopefully with fire, to keep up with those fire regimes. So that's our challenge. That's where we're at. That's what we're dealing with. So how much fire do we actually get in the Southwest? Do we have the possibility to even get there? So let's look at different fire types. So in this case, we're looking at human-caused fires. So the Southwest has the second most human-caused acres in the nation. So the map up top here shows the different regions. So you have the Southwest here, the Southeast, which was mentioned earlier in Elizabeth's talk with a lot of prescribed fire. But they also have a lot of human-caused fire, right? So wildfires that were set by humans. And then the Southwest here, with about 350,000 acres a year on average from human fires. Now the one thing that's interesting about this, and I don't have a slide that specifically shows it, is that the Southwest actually doesn't even really register relative to the rest of the nation the number of human-caused fires. So while we have very few number of human-caused fires, we have huge acres from that. So obviously the fires that do start from humans in the Southwest have a tendency to get big. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. Let's look at lightning. So natural emissions. What are our opportunities with natural emissions? When we look at the Southwest, here is what we're looking for. The Southwest reports the most lightning-caused fires in the nation. So that tells us that we have some opportunities for more fire, if that's your perspective. In my mind, right now, based on what I showed you earlier, we need more fire, right? So I'm happy about this. Okay, so then let's look, so how many acres, I should say, do we actually get from these starts? When we look at the United States as a whole, the Southwest is pretty low. So we have this huge amount of lightning fires, but we only get not even 300,000 acres from those lightning fires. So is it that we put them all out? Or is it that they occur in conditions where they just don't grow very big? What's going on there? And those are questions for management, really, and I don't have those answers today, but those are things to think about. So then you look at Alaska here. They have the fewest reported lightning fires in the nation, and they have the most acres. And basically, they don't put any fires out that are lightning for the most part, so that might be an answer there. Okay. All right, so let's look at our numbers here. So 15-year average, we have about 642,000 acres that burn in the Southwest, with about 54% of those being human-caused, and then 46% of those being lightning-caused across all agencies. So that's not just the Forest Service, that's everybody. So for the Forest Service, if we add accomplishments of about 263,000 on average per year, that includes our mechanical treatments, prescribed burns, and then our use of wildfire, to our natural ignitions, so we're double counting some acres here, of 296,000 acres, we get to 560 or so thousand acres. We're still not at that 945,000 acre target that we should have for the Forest Service. And we're definitely not even close to that 4 million plus acres for Arizona and New Mexico. So that's our situation. We know we can't get there with mechanical treatments, not to mention that they cost on average from $500 to $1,200 an acre. So that's an expensive way to go. We're not getting there with our current pace of prescribed fire, but Elizabeth just mentioned that Region 3, so the Southwestern region, has the potential maybe to get there with prescribed fire, so that's good. Hopefully we can do that. And right now, by combining both our mechanical treatments, our prescribed fire, and our use of wildfire, we're not there yet. So how do we get there? And then should we get there? Do we have the social and political support to get there? Brian mentioned smoke earlier. That's a huge deal for us. Can we really put that much smoke in the air? What does that mean for our public? And then with what effect? How are things burning right now? And how little do we need? Can we do with less and still have the ecosystems functioning the way we need them to be resilient to changes coming our way? And how much can we take? How much can these ecosystems take? So those are the questions that I throw at Andi regularly. And that's where she comes in. So, this is where I start taking Andi's slides and misinterpreting them for my benefit. Right? So what we have here is a map of the Southwest, Arizona and New Mexico. And we have areas in black are the fires that have occurred, the large fires that have occurred in the Southwest. So if I was to overlay Forest Service ownership on top of this, it would almost match perfectly. A lot of our fires in the Southwest occur on Forest Service lands. It's just where the forests are, okay? Except for some of these areas in eastern New Mexico here. So we're going to start by looking at, have we seen an increase in the number of fires, and have we seen an increase in areas burned of fire? So think about these questions and how I would interpret them. I'm going to tell you here in a second. But I could be pretty excited if we saw an increase, right? So this is based on Megan's work, and Megan's in the room, and we'll be talking this week, so please go see her talk, especially if you want more information about this. What we see is the number of fires has significantly increased. The number of acres has significantly increased. So to me, as a manager who needs to somehow get to 945,000 acres a year on Forest Service lands, I'm pretty excited about this. This is good news for me. Okay, so remember, this is contemporary, so this is from 1984 to 2003. But we add to this climate. So we know the Southwest is warming, and we know, based on this data, that as the climate warms, we see an increase in fire frequency. And Pete, I believe, Pete Poulet is going to talk a lot more about this later this morning. So we have an increase in fire frequency based on climate. So as things keep going, we could see even more of an increase. And add to that, that we have some huge changes in our fields. So because of that lack of fire that I talked about earlier, post-settlement, our forests are very different than they were in our reference conditions when we were seeing such huge acres burning. So fires are burning probably really differently than they used to. And so trying to quantify that and understand what that means for our ecosystems is where research comes in and is super important. So how are these fires burning? This is the map of the Las Conchas fire in New Mexico near Los Alamos. What we see here, this is a map of severity. So the areas in green and then in that lighter green are those that didn't burn or burned with very low severity. So very low impact to the overstory vegetation. The moderate there is going to be in the yellow, and then the high severity, where we would expect most of the overstory vegetation to be consumed by fire, is in red. So you'll see this map again, but we have some concerns here. We have a big blotch of red, and that's where we start to ask a lot of questions. If we look at this map that I showed you earlier of all the fires across Arizona and New Mexico, and then we add in red the areas of high severity to that, you can see them stand out again. And again, you have these big patches of red. And again, that raises a lot of questions for managers across the Southwest, even for me, who wants a lot more fire on the landscape. So the questions are, is high severity becoming more common in our fires? Are bigger fires having more high severity and more percent high severity in those areas? Is the area of high severity increasing over time? And is the percent of high severity increasing over time? And then does that change depending on the vegetation type that you're looking at? So those are some of the questions we're going to try to look at, and Megan's looked at. And again, go see her talk, she'll answer a lot of these questions. So let's think about how common high severity fire is. What this is showing is that 90% of all of our fires have 50% or less high severity. And then 50% of our fires have 5% or less high severity. So overall, we really are seeing quite a bit of low and moderate severity in these fires. So this is good news. This means that really maybe we're not seeing a huge impact, or we're seeing some high severity, but maybe not as much. If we look at it differently, so do larger fires have more high severity areas? And yes, they do. So as the fires get larger, they have bigger patches or bigger areas, acres in general, of high severity. Do they have a higher percent? So based on the total area burned, do they have more percent high severity than the smaller fire? And the answer there is no. So we're not seeing an increase in percent in individual fires. But has the area of high severity increased overall? And has the percent of high severity fire increased overall? And that's where Megan's work comes in again. So here, we are seeing the percent of high severity has significantly increased. And we are also seeing that the area of high severity has significantly increased. And Megan goes on to answer there that we do see some variability of high severity based on the vegetation type. So that's this last question here that we're going to look at for just a second. So what was done here is ecosystem types, or ecological response units, were grouped into similar fire regimes. So it goes from Madrian systems all the way to some wet mixed conifer systems with different fire regimes associated with those. Then you put those together and you look at some of the acres that were burned with high severity, and then the acres overall, and we get a certain percent of those different ecosystems types that were burned with high severity. If we look at the classic ponderosa pine, we see that only about 16% of it burned with high severity in these fires. So if you think about a ponderosa pine system, that's our classic high frequency, low severity system. This could be pretty okay, pretty all right. But what we're missing here is patch size, right? So this problem with the lost conscious fire, these huge extents. If we take a picture of that from Craig Allen, we see these areas that were PJ, so piñon and juniper systems, ponderosa pine, dry mixed conifer and wet mixed conifer, they all burn the same. They all burn with high severity. So we have this big landscape scale patch of high severity, which obviously has huge impacts on erosion, on watershed health, recovery. What do these systems look like when you have an event like this? And that's the big question. We don't really have a big answer for that big question. We do know that high severity is not desirable in our systems for the most part. In systems where it might be appropriate, we have a lot of questions about how big, to what extent is high severity okay for those systems. And then what about, so how is fire burning? What does that mean for our restoration goals across the Southwest? So returning the structure and the compositions of forests and ecosystems to what they may have looked like in the past before that cessation of fire in the late 1880s. So Dave Huffman kind of looked at some of this stuff, and this is in revision now. Looked at some fires, so managed fires. So these were fires that had multiple objectives. So some of them may have been for protection, so suppression type tactics, and some of them may have been for ecological benefit. On the Kaibab and the Coconino National Forest. And then they compared those results to what was published in GTR 310 based on reference conditions, and looked at severity. What we have here is these are the characteristics, the attributes that were in GTR 310 that were compared to historical conditions. Then we have burn severity, so unburned to low, low severity, moderate, and high severity. The cells in the darker color here are those that met the objectives or the desired conditions in GTR 310. And those other ones are either low or higher than those that were spelled out by GTR 310. So what we see here is, in general, moderate severity fires tend to meet more of those attributes from GTR 310. So, an interesting thing to think about. Another thing that we like to think about is the jigsaw puzzle. So this is an example from the San Carlos Apache lands, and you're going to hear probably a lot more about them at the end of this morning. This is the Nantucket Rim. So, 2009 and 2011, they added some puzzle pieces of fire here. Then again in 2012 and 2013, and again in 2014. So over time what they've done here is they've created a landscape that has a jigsaw puzzle, if you will, of fire in just a couple years. So this is a great example of using fire to really get at a landscape scale issue. All right, so to summarize, and I just saw it 5 minutes. Actually, I probably saw it 3 minutes ago, so I'm talking about it. But anyways, so reference fire regimes would indicate that we are severely lacking in fire and that we're not meeting that with our current management. So this is our challenge, right? Contemporary trends, thanks to Megan's work, shows that the number of fires has increased and so has the area burned. So this could be helpful. This is good news, maybe. But then we look at the severity piece, and this is not so good news. So we see this increase in severity, increase in patches. And then we have some information about moderate fire severity has the potential to meet restoration objectives. So this is really interesting. And it's something that as managers we've observed. We've seen this, and we've talked about it. We know low severity doesn't do much to change the composition or structure of our forests. And we know that moderate severity does. So we take that information, and where do we go with it? We also know that the Southwest has the most reported lightning fires in the nation. Those are opportunities. So obviously wildfire is a great tool when used appropriately and used in the right conditions. We need to be poised to use it appropriately, and that means landscape planning. That means time landscape planning. And you're going to see a lot of talks this week about that. And it's not an exact tool, and we have to be fair and talk about that to our publics, in terms of different agencies, to our researchers, that no, it's not this says color by number. It's more of a passive, a widespread. To meet objectives, stop being afraid of a little bit of severity on our landscapes. We tend to think that the fire is low severity. And we look at the maps post-fire, and everything that's in low severity, we count those acres towards our targets, completely ignoring that the moderate severity is probably where we're actually getting the biggest bang for our buck. So we need to be looking at that. Then we have these challenges and these barriers that a lot of times are self-imposed, but we need to go over those, and there's a talk this week on that as well. And then we need to learn from the past 3 years. We've actually had some really great successes in the Southwest in the past 3 years, and we need to capitalize on those. We need to talk about our successes and how we got there. And this type of conference is exactly a perfect place to do that, to talk about this. So a few thoughts. So as managers and as researchers, we need to embrace fire and be ready to capitalize on those opportunities. And it might take a lot of creative thinking, and it definitely takes the mindset that every fire, every start we have on our landscape is an opportunity. It might be a small opportunity, but it is an opportunity. Okay? And then from a research perspective, all of those opportunities might have to be with learning, and then sharing that knowledge with managers, and growing with that relationship. And then I'm going to end by saying that these type of conferences, these areas where we can exchange ideas, information, and knowledge from managers to research and research to management is absolutely key for success if we're going to go forward and use fire as a tool in our landscapes and restore this. So we've had some challenges with these conferences, getting folks here, and I'm just making a plea that we never give up and that we keep coming. And so I thank you all for being here. So thank you.